When my premature son was born, every day in the neonatal unit felt like a battle between hope and fear. I knew every beep of his monitor, every wrinkle of the blanket around him. But one morning, I walked into the NICU and froze. There was another baby in my son's incubator, a child I had never seen before. My heart lurched. Where was my son? The nurse, who had always been warm and reassuring, suddenly grew tense, her voice clipped and cautious. As I pressed her for answers, I felt the air in the room shift, as though I had just stepped into a story I was never meant to hear. Can still remember the exact hum of the NICU, that constant background chorus of machines, punctuated by the soft hisses of ventilators and the occasional alarm that made every parent's heart skip a beat. For 2 weeks, this had been my world. My son, Elias, was so small that I could wrap my hand around his entire torso. Every day, I would walk in, place my palm gently against the side of the incubator, and whisper to him as though my voice could coax him into growing stronger. That morning started like any other. I carried my usual mix of fear and determination, the kind you develop when you've handed your baby over to strangers in scrubs and masks, trusting they'd protect him better than you could. But the moment I stepped through the sliding doors, something was wrong. I didn't see his blanket, the pale blue one I brought from home, the one with tiny stitched stars that my mother had made. Instead, inside Elias's incubator, there was another baby. A bigger one. A baby I had never seen before. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe I had walked into the wrong row of incubators, but no. I knew the position by heart. Row 3, second from the wall. That was his spot. I could have found it blindfolded. My breath caught in my throat. Where's my baby? The words tumbled out before I could steady my voice. A nurse I knew well, Clara, turned at the sound of my voice. Normally, she greeted me with a smile and an update before I even reached the incubator. This time, her expression shifted almost instantly. Her eyes darted from me to the baby, then to the doorway, as though calculating who else might have heard my question. Mrs. Price. Let's talk in the hallway, she said softly, almost like she was coaxing a frightened animal. No, I said, my voice rising without my permission. Where is my son? Where is Elias? Clara's hand tightened on the chart she was holding. He's fine. He's being monitored. But we need to step outside. Monitored? Where? My pulse was pounding in my ears. The other parents in the room had started to glance over. She hesitated, and for the briefest second, I saw something flash across her face, not guilt exactly, but fear. Not fear of me, but fear for me. Please, Mrs. Price, she whispered. It's not what you think. But you can't be here right now. I glanced back at the baby in the incubator, at the stranger wrapped in a generic white hospital blanket. My eyes searched the room frantically for Elias, the tuft of dark hair, the blue blanket, the monitor with his name. But there was nothing. No sign of him. Then, I noticed something else. Clara's hands were shaking. That was when I realized, she wasn't just hiding my son's location. She was hiding something much bigger. Clara, I said, my voice low but trembling. What happened to my baby? She swallowed hard, took a step toward me, and whispered something I couldn't fully hear over the beeping monitors, but I caught one word, switched. The word hung in the air like it didn't belong there. Switched. My brain couldn't quite process it, as if my mind was trying to protect me from understanding. I stood frozen, staring at Clara, waiting for her to take it back, to tell me I'd misheard. But she didn't. She glanced toward the far corner of the NICU, where another nurse was adjusting a monitor. I followed her gaze and realized she was silently asking for backup. That set off alarm bells in my chest. If my son was safe and everything was fine, why did she need someone else to be here before talking to me? Clara, I pressed, my voice a sharp whisper, tell me right now, where is Elias? She stepped closer, lowering her voice even more. There was a mix-up during the early shift. 2 incubators, 2 babies. There was some confusion about ID tags. What do you mean confusion? I cut in. My voice was shaking now. You're telling me you don't know where my son is? It's not that we don't know, she said quickly, but her words wavered. We're verifying something. I didn't want her euphemisms. I wanted the truth. I glanced at the baby lying where my son should be, and a wave of nausea hit me. The baby's wristband caught my eye. The name wasn't Elias Price. It was Lucas M., and the rest was hidden under the blanket. My stomach dropped. The other nurse, a tall man with a clipped tone, walked over. Mrs. Price, I need you to come with me, he said, like I was being escorted out of a crime scene. I'm not leaving until I see my son. He exchanged a look with Clara, that silent exchange medical staff have when they're debating what to say in front of family. Your baby is stable, he said finally. He's in a different area right now for precautionary monitoring. Precautionary for what? My voice was rising again, drawing the attention of more parents. A few of them shifted uncomfortably. As if afraid this was contagious, the nightmare of walking in and finding someone else's baby where yours should be. Clara placed her hand on my arm. Please. We just need a few minutes. I yanked my arm back. No. I need answers now. If there's been some swap, I couldn't even say the full word, then I have the right to know exactly what happened and where my son is. The tall nurse's jaw tightened. Mrs. Price, I'm going to have to ask security to escort you out of the NICU if you can't remain calm. It was like being slapped. I wasn't a threat. I was a mother demanding to know where her child was. And the fact that they wanted me out told me more than their words ever could. I felt my legs moving on instinct, stepping past them toward the far end of the NICU. I knew there was a restricted area behind those glass doors. If Elias was anywhere, he was in there. Ma'am, you can't go in there, the nurse called after me, but my hands were already on the door. For a split second, I caught a glimpse inside rows of incubators, fewer than the main NICU, and at the far corner, a nurse hunched over an incubator with her back to me. Then the door slammed shut as the tall nurse blocked my view. Clara's face was pale. Mrs. Price, you don't understand, she said, her voice breaking for the first time, and then she whispered something else, words that made my blood run cold. Your son wasn't breathing when we found him. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. Wasn't breathing. They echoed in my head over and over, until they didn't sound like words anymore, just noise. My knees felt weak, and I had to grab the edge of a counter to stop myself from sinking to the floor. I stared at Clara, trying to read her expression, to figure out if she was softening the truth or if this was as bad as it sounded. What do you mean he wasn't breathing? My voice cracked on the last word. She hesitated, glancing toward the tall nurse who was still standing between me and the restricted doors. His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. During the early morning checks, one of the nurses noticed Elias's oxygen levels had dropped suddenly, she said. By the time they got to him, his monitor wasn't registering a heartbeat. The words were clinical, practiced. But I could hear the strain underneath. We initiated resuscitation immediately. He responded. He's alive, Mrs. Price. He's alive. Alive. The word should have comforted me, but it didn't. It just made me think about how close I'd come to losing him, how fragile that line was between life and the other side. Why wasn't I called? I demanded. If my son stopped breathing, why wasn't I here? Why am I finding out about this after walking in and seeing another baby in his place? Clara looked at the floor. It all happened so fast. And there was a complication. My chest tightened. What complication? The tall nurse finally spoke. During the emergency, there was confusion over patient ID bands. The other baby's monitor was also alarming at the same time. There was a crossover. A crossover. I imagined a chaotic scene, alarms blaring, nurses rushing from one incubator to another, and in that frenzy, somehow, my baby's identity getting mixed up. But how does that even happen in a hospital? I took a step toward the doors again. I want to see him. Now. The tall nurse blocked me once more. He's undergoing further tests. We need to make sure of what? My voice was sharper now, the fear giving way to anger. Clara stepped in, placing a hand on his arm. Let her see him, she said quietly. He didn't move. He just stood there like a wall. And then I realized something. They weren't just keeping me from him because he was fragile. They were keeping me from seeing something. My mind spiraled with possibilities. Was he injured? Did the lack of oxygen leave damage? Or was there a chance that the baby they had in that room wasn't even mine anymore? I pressed my hand against the glass of the door, peering through the narrow strip. I caught another glimpse of that far corner. The nurse who had been hunched over an incubator straightened up, and I saw a tiny body lying still inside. The blue blanket was there. The one with the stitched stars. Before I could process it, the tall nurse stepped into my line of sight, blocking it completely. Mrs. Price, he said firmly, if you want to see your son, you'll have to wait until the doctor clears you. That's the safest thing for him right now. But my gut told me that waiting was the most dangerous thing I could do. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice so only Clara could hear. Tell me the truth. Was there a moment when you weren't sure if the baby you revived was mine? Her eyes flickered, just enough to confirm what I feared, and then she whispered, that's what the tests are for. The hours that followed felt like a cruel experiment in patience. They led me to a small family room with beige walls and no windows, the kind of place designed to calm you down but that only makes you feel trapped. I refused the tea they offered. I didn't want comfort. I wanted my son. Every few minutes, I'd glance at the door, half expecting someone to burst in with news. Instead, Clara came in quietly, holding a clipboard like it was a shield. She sat across from me and folded her hands. They're running genetic verification, she said. Just as a precaution. The words hit me like ice water. Genetic verification? Are you saying there's a chance he isn't mine? Her eyes darted to the floor. It's protocol after any identification error. Protocol, I repeated bitterly. You don't need a protocol if you never lose track of the right baby in the first place. She didn't argue. That silence told me more than anything else could. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but my mind kept flashing back to the moment I saw that other baby in Elias's incubator. If the bands had been switched, even for a moment, what else could have been mixed up? Treatments? Medications? What if the wrong baby had been revived? Clara shifted in her chair. Mrs. Price, I need you to understand, during those minutes when we were working on him, every second mattered. There wasn't time to double-check tags before starting resuscitation. Then you're admitting you didn't know which baby was which, I said. She didn't deny it. A knock on the door cut through the tension. The tall nurse stepped in, holding an envelope. His expression was unreadable. The results are in. I stood so fast my chair tipped backward. Give them to me. He hesitated, glancing at Clara. She gave a small nod. He handed me the envelope, but didn't move to leave. It was as if he wanted to watch my reaction. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a hospital logo at the top. I scanned for the words I dreaded. Sample A and Sample B were listed, followed by a percentage. My breath caught when I saw it. 99.99%. Relief should have flooded me, but it didn't. Instead, my eyes caught on another line, one I almost missed. Note, discrepancy in blood type from recorded birth chart. Further review recommended. I looked up sharply. What does this mean? His blood type doesn't match? The tall nurse shifted uncomfortably. It could be a clerical error. Or It could mean this isn't my baby, I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. Clara reached for my hand, but I pulled back. No more half-truths. No more protocols. I want to see my son. Now. They finally led me down the hallway toward the restricted room. My heart pounded as the door slid open. There, in the far corner, was the incubator with the blue blanket. I rushed forward, pressing my hands against the warm plastic. Elias was lying still, his tiny chest rising and falling. A tube ran from his nose, and wires traced across his body, but he was there. I wanted to collapse in relief, but then I noticed something that made my stomach clench. On his ankle, barely visible under the cuff of the blanket, was a white band. And it didn't have his name. It had mine, not Elias Price. Just Price. As if they still weren't entirely sure who he was. Before I could demand answers, the tall nurse stepped beside me and said quietly, "Mrs. Price. There's something else you need to know. We weren't the ones who found him first." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "What do you mean you weren't the ones who found him first?" My voice was calm, but inside, every nerve was on fire. The tall nurse glanced at Clara, then at the incubator, as if the tiny rise and fall of Elias's chest was a reminder of how fragile this conversation needed to be. Clara spoke first. "There was a parent here during the early shift. She came in before visiting hours." I blinked at her. "And you just let her walk in? Into the NICU? Alone?" Clara shook her head. "We didn't know she was here until after." My stomach turned. "Who?" The tall nurse hesitated, then said, "Lucas's mother." I froze. Lucas. The name on the other baby's wristband. She claims she heard an alarm from across the room, Clara continued. When she came over, she says she found Elias unresponsive. She shouted for help. That's when staff intervened. I stared at them both, my thoughts racing. Why was she near my son's incubator at all? Neither of them answered right away. Finally, the tall nurse said she thought it was her baby's monitor going off. In the chaos, she didn't realize until later that it wasn't. It didn't make sense. Parents aren't supposed to be able to get near another child station without staff noticing. The NICU is locked down, every entry point monitored. For her to be standing over Elias before anyone else, she either had access, or someone gave it to her. I looked down at Elias, his tiny fingers curled into fists, oblivious to the storm swirling around him. My heart ached with love and rage all at once. Where is she now? I asked. Clara glanced at the door. In a private room with her baby. We've asked her not to leave until we've finished reviewing the security footage. The tall nurse shifted, his voice lower now. There's another problem. The footage from that morning is missing. It felt like the floor tilted under me. Missing? As in deleted? We don't know yet, Clara said quickly, but I could see from her eyes that she didn't believe her own words. I turned back to Elias. My hand rested on the side of the incubator, and I made myself a silent promise. Whatever this was, mistake, cover-up, or something darker, I wasn't going to let it be buried under hospital protocols and vague explanations. Bring her to me, I said finally. If she was the first one to see my son like that, I want to hear every single detail from her. Clara hesitated. That might not be wise right now. Emotions are high. I'm not asking for permission, I said, my voice steady. I'm telling you. The tall nurse stepped out, and moments later, the door opened again. A woman walked in, holding a baby swaddled in a white blanket. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief second, I couldn't read them. Pity, fear, maybe something else. I'm sorry for what happened, she said softly. But you need to understand, when I got to him, he wasn't alone. The words caught me off guard. What do you mean? Her gaze didn't waver. There was someone else standing over his incubator before me. The room seemed to shrink around us. My grip tightened on the incubator's edge. Who? She opened her mouth to answer, and then the door behind her clicked open. A man in a suit stepped in, holding a folder. His tone was calm but firm. "That's enough," he said. "This conversation ends now." And just like that, I knew this wasn't only about a medical emergency. This was something far bigger and far more dangerous.